When I was around 10 years old, my family used to visit my grandparents every summer. They lived in this old countryside town where most of the houses were spread far apart with acres of land between them. My older brother Tyler and I would spend hours exploring the area, and we became friends with a few local kids who lived nearby. One of the places we'd always been warned to stay away from was the old Miller property. It sat at the end of a dirt road about a quarter mile from my grandparents' house. The place had been empty for years after the family just up and left one day, leaving everything behind. Of course, being kids, that just made it more appealing to us. One evening, right before sunset, me, Tyler, and 3 other kids decided to play tag on the Miller property. The overgrown yard was massive, with a tool shed, a detached garage, and the main house itself, plenty of places to run and hide. I was it first. I counted to 30 while everyone scattered. After I finished counting, I started searching. I tagged 2 kids pretty quickly near the garage. Tyler was always the hardest to find, so I saved him for last. I finally spotted movement near the tool shed and ran toward it. As I got closer, I saw Tyler standing in the doorway, completely still, facing away from me into the darkness of the shed. "Got you," I yelled, reaching out to tag him, but before my hand made contact, I heard Tyler's voice behind me say, "Dude, I'm right here." I spun around. Tyler was standing about 15 feet away, near an old oak tree, looking confused. When I turned back to the shed, whoever I had seen was gone. The doorway was empty. We both just stood there for a second, trying to process what happened. Then Tyler said something that made my blood run cold. "I saw you go into the main house like 5 minutes ago. I was waiting for you to come out." Neither of us had gone anywhere near the main house. We called off the game immediately and got the other kids. When we told them what happened, one of them, a girl named Rebecca, went pale. She said that while she was hiding behind the garage, she saw me walk past her and head toward the back of the property. But I had never gone to the back of the property. I'd been searching near the front the entire time. That meant all 3 of us had seen someone who looked like one of us, but wasn't. We ran back to my grandparents' house and didn't go back to the Miller property for the rest of that summer. Years later, I did some research on the place. Turns out the Miller family had a son who died on the property in the early 1900s. He was playing with his siblings when he fell into an old well and drowned. They never found his body right away. It took them 3 days of searching. According to the local stories, his spirit never stopped playing that game of hide and seek. I'm 17 now, but this happened last year when I was 16. I live in a pretty rural area with lots of forest surrounding the neighborhood. Me and my group of friends, there's Jake, Marcus, Steven, Emma, and Lily. We all grew up together, and we've always treated the woods like our own personal playground. About 2 years ago, we built this fort deep in the woods, maybe a 15-minute walk from the nearest house. It wasn't anything fancy, just some plywood and 2x4s we borrowed from various garages, but it was ours. We'd go there almost every weekend to hang out, especially during the summer. Last October, we decided to have a camp out at the fort. We brought sleeping bags, snacks, flashlights, the whole deal. There were 6 of us total that night. Around midnight, we were all sitting around telling scary stories when Emma said she needed to use the bathroom. The fort didn't have plumbing, obviously, so she just meant she was going to walk a little ways into the woods. Lily offered to go with her, and they both took a flashlight. They were gone for maybe 2 minutes when we heard Emma scream. We all jumped up and ran in the direction they'd gone. We found both of them standing frozen about 30 yards from the fort. Their flashlight pointed at something in the trees. When we got closer, we saw what they were looking at. Standing between 2 trees was a figure. It looked exactly like Marcus. Same height, same jacket, same posture, but Marcus was standing right next to me. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, perfectly still, staring at us. Or at least we assumed it was staring. We couldn't quite make out the face in the darkness, even with our flashlights pointed directly at it. "Marcus, is that your brother?" Jake asked, his voice shaking. "I don't have a brother," Marcus replied quietly. For what felt like an eternity, we all just stood there. Then Steven, who was always the bravest of us, started walking toward it. "Hey!" he called out. "Who are you?" The figure turned and walked deeper into the woods, moving in this weird, jerky way that didn't look natural. Steven started to follow it, but Jake grabbed his arm. "Dude, don't!" We all ran back to the fort, grabbed our stuff, and didn't stop moving until we were back at Jake's house. We didn't even bother packing everything properly. We just grabbed what we could and left. The next day, Jake and his older brother went back to get the rest of our stuff. When they got to the fort, they found something that made us never want to go back. Our sleeping bags had been arranged in a circle around the fort. In the center was a pile of branches arranged to look like a person lying down, and on top of that pile was Marcus's jacket, the same one he'd been wearing the night before and had definitely taken home with him. We asked Marcus if maybe he'd left it behind and forgotten, but he showed us the jacket. He still had it. So someone or something had left an exact copy of his jacket at the fort. We never went back to those woods again. The fort is still out there, as far as I know, but whatever was pretending to be one of us that night can have it. When I was 14, I used to stay over at my friend Chris's house almost every weekend. Chris lived in this neighborhood that was built back in the 70s, and right behind his backyard was this massive drainage tunnel that connected to the sewer system. The tunnel entrance was maybe 50 feet from his back fence, just sitting there in this concrete embankment. Chris, his younger sister Maya, who was 12, and I would sometimes dare each other to go into the tunnel, but none of us ever made it more than 20 or 30 feet before chickening out. It was pitch black in there, and the echo of water dripping made everything sound 10 times creepier than it actually was. One Friday night, Chris's parents were out for the evening, so it was just the three of us. We were bored out of our minds when Maya suggested we play a game she called flashlight tag in the drainage tunnel. The rules were simple. One person would be it, and count to 60 while the other two went into the tunnel to hide. The person who was it had the only flashlight and had to find the others in the dark. I thought it was a terrible idea, but Chris was immediately on board, probably because he didn't want to look scared in front of his little sister. So I reluctantly agreed. Maya volunteered to be it first. Me and Chris headed into the tunnel while she counted. We didn't go very far, maybe 40 feet in, before we found a spot where the tunnel branched off into a smaller side passage. We crouched down there in complete darkness and waited. We heard Maya enter the tunnel, her footsteps echoing off the concrete walls. The beam of her flashlight danced across the curved ceiling as she walked deeper. She was calling out, "I'm gonna find you guys," in a sing-song voice. Then her footsteps stopped. The light stopped moving. "Maya?" Chris called out. No response. We waited for maybe 30 seconds. Then Chris whispered to me, "Dude, what's she doing?" That's when we heard footsteps again, but they weren't coming from the direction Maya had been. They were coming from deeper in the tunnel, from the opposite direction, further than either of us had ever gone, and they were getting closer. Chris and I pressed ourselves against the wall of our little side passage. The footsteps were slow and deliberate, echoing through the tunnel. Then we saw a light, but it wasn't a flashlight beam. It was dimmer, like a phone screen or something, and it had this weird bluish tint to it. As it got closer, I could make out a silhouette behind the light. It was too tall to be Maya, way too tall. The figure moved with this strange, stiff gait, like its knees didn't bend properly. Chris grabbed my arm and squeezed so hard it hurt. The figure walked right past our hiding spot. In the dim blue light, I got a look at it. It was wearing clothes. I could see that much, but I couldn't make out any features. The face was just dark. Not shadowed, but actually dark, like there was nothing there. It continued down the tunnel toward the entrance, and we heard Maya scream. That snapped us out of our frozen state. We ran toward the entrance as fast as we could in the pitch darkness, stumbling and scraping our hands on the concrete walls. When we finally emerged from the tunnel, we found Maya standing outside, shaking. The flashlight dropped at her feet. "Something walked out of the tunnel," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. It looked like Chris, but wrong. The face was wrong. Chris and I looked at each other. We told her what we saw. Chris's parents came home about an hour later and found all three of us sitting in the living room with every light in the house turned on. We told them we'd just been watching scary movies, but the truth was, none of us could bring ourselves to be in the dark after what happened. A few weeks later, I was over at Chris's house again. His dad mentioned that some city workers had gone into the drainage tunnel to do maintenance and found something weird about 100 feet in. A camping setup with a sleeping bag, some empty food cans, and a bunch of old clothes. But whoever had been staying there was long gone. His dad laughed it off, saying it was probably just some homeless person who'd found shelter there. But that didn't explain what we saw. That figure wasn't human, and whatever it was, it had been living in that tunnel, in the darkness, maybe for a very long time. We never played flashlight tag again. In fact, we never went near that tunnel again. Sometimes when I stay over at Chris's house now, I look out the back window at night toward where that tunnel entrance is. And sometimes, I swear I can see a faint blue light glowing from inside it.